This is the Biz News Podcast, one-on-one conversations with experts in business and personal development.
Carolina Billings says it was her divorce after 20 years of marriage that was her wake-up call, and a jarring one at that. One change was a revenue stream. Instead of two incomes, her household suddenly had one. She says too many women, as she had been, know too little about family finances, putting them on thin ice if there's a divorce or another major change in their lives. Out of the ashes of her divorce, coming as she was entering her midlife, Ms. Billings has formed a new organization targeting women who found themselves in similar situations. She talks about it in this edition of Biz News Interviews. Carolina, you say that you had a life-altering event in your own life that has led you to see the need to, as you put it, awaken women's emotional and financial independence. We could talk all day about this, but let's start with what was that life-altering event?
Well, after 20 years of marriage, my relationship came to a natural ending. Not all relationships are meant forever. That doesn't mean that they're bad relationships. It just means it came to a natural ending. And having gotten married very young, I remember I used to open my front door and people would say, are your parents home? And it's like, no, this is my home. So, after 20 years of marriage, I found myself living on my own for the first time. And it became a little bit of an I Love Lucy meet Survivor, right? I am, a well-educated professional woman. So on one side of my life, I had progressed and matured accordingly. But on the other side, I had a lot to learn. So when I came out of that marriage, I found myself very ill equipped to deal with the reality of running your own life. And this happens to a lot of women. Actually,
Carolina, you've got a PhD. How
I
could you
do.
not be equipped to run your own life?
I do now. 10 years ago, I didn't have my PhD, but that's not what's going to make the difference. What most women, and I meet a lot of professional women, what happens is you build a life based on two incomes, right? And you're used to the home, you're used to a certain lifestyle, you're used to your children are used to a certain lifestyle, and then you come out on your own, right? And needless to say, divorce sets you back financially for both parties, not just for one, right? And I even took an alternative route, which I am happy to share with you and your audience. But the main thing is that I found, the number one thing is that I couldn't afford myself. And and at the time, I mean, I own my own business now, but at the time I was within the C-suite. And the lifestyle that I had grown accustomed to was not something I could afford on my own.
So what did you do about it?
What did I do about it? Well, interesting. I had to adjust, right? Is clearly my priorities had to shift, my mindset had to shift, and the importance. There were so many things. I was in a functioning marriage for all intent and purposes, and there's a lot of things that I reneged being an active participant in our marriage. If you think of it as a partnership, right? I was not really involved in the finances. I was not really involved in many things that, when you're in a relationship, sometimes we tend to fall into gender kind of, my ex-husband took care of the cars, my ex-husband took care of, a number of things. And he's a lovely gentleman. So it's not to say, he was not good with money, but he was better with money than I was. So even though, yeah, right. Even though, I had never negotiated my own mortgage, I had never, dealt with, my own investment portfolio. Like, yes, I put away, my RSPs or 401k, but I never really understood understood it, right? And I leaned a lot on my ex-husband to take care of that, and he was very good at it, right? And I myself put like many women, we put ourselves into very vulnerable positions financially, because you can end up being responsible for your family's finances by chance or choice. It doesn't have to be a divorce. It could be a death in the family, it could be illness, it could be anything that all of a sudden you have to pick up the helm. And a lot of women, and I know you sound surprised, but you would be shocked how many professional women do not know exactly what's going on in their family finances.
Well, I guess it is shocking because if you're a professional woman, you presumably have all those skills built in.
Is just something. I'm not saying that they don't have the ability to understand. Clearly they're professional, right? It's not that. It's just that when you enter into a relationship, right, you set up certain patterns, certain dynamics that kind of become the norm. And then if somewhere along the way you try to change them, it can cause a little bit of friction in the marriage. And sometimes, you kind of don't want to go rocking the boat. If you go for harmony instead of trying to. And I'll give you an example. So when I got married, I was 22 years old, and my partner was 8 years old. He still is 8 years older than me. So we enter into a somewhat disproportionate power dynamic, right? And I'm not saying it was right or wrong. It worked for many years. And in the process of growing up and becoming, having a significant role in finance, in the field of finance, and having my education, I remember once beginning to ask, right? Like, so let's talk about our plan, our portfolio. And in this, I'm not saying this is the same for all relationships. I'm telling you my personal experience, right? And I remember him being actually hurt. And he said, what's the concern? Don't you trust me?
Carolina, and that is how did all of this then turn into a business and new career for you?
Yeah, so what ended up happening is, so I exited this marriage in the best of terms. And I'll tell you one secret to to the best of terms for women. So I exited, and it was very disorienting, even though I was an active participant in the dissolution of that relationship. I found it disorienting because I have spent the first 20 years of my adult life in it, right? So now I'm kind of navigating on my own. And, even a friend of mine said, okay, so now you're 20 again, except you have a credit card and a car. What are you going to do with your life? Right. And it was just this. And I also feel a huge sense of responsibility to succeed, right? Because I had hurt, not intentionally, but in the process of doing this, I had hurt a lot of people, right? And I felt this huge need that it had to be worth for something big, right? And so I began to look for other women that had gone through similar transitions or similar experiences than I had. And what I found was a spectrum. There were either nurturing groups that were very boo-hoo-hoo about the indignation of it all, right? And then there were at the opposite end, there were all professional groups, right? Like, let's get to it. You're either a CPA or you're an HR, you're whatever, you're professional, but there wasn't a lot of room to speak about the woman behind the success. So, and like I said, at the time I was working full time within, 1% earner in Canada. So things were okay, but there was still that conversation that needed to be had. What about me? Right? And I don't mean that from the selfish standpoint, but women, we're givers. We tend to serve, right? We enter a marriage, we build a home, then we have kids, we give to our kids. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves, parking all of our dreams, all of our goals, or a lot of them, right? And then, we find ourselves being empty nesters, or we find ourselves, just entering the 40s, and, and such, and thinking, whatever happened to my dreams? And not even from a selfish, because actually it's biological. As women begin to enter midlife, right, and we go through the hormonal change, our nurturing hormone drop. So you feel this surge to go, what about me? I know, right? And you see a lot of women starting their businesses and starting to really kick things up, like around their mid 40s, maybe their 50s, right? That they're just circling back to the woman that, they had to park for a little bit.
What was it difficult to make that transition?
You know what? It wasn't. I know it was one of, this is the power of passion, right? And the power of just letting things be. So what ended up happening is I identified that there was a gap in the community, right, business and personal, where there was not a space for women to come to a place of non-judgment, where if you're driven and somebody comes and says, you know what, I want to take over the world, right, nobody would judge you. They would just go, awesome, you're in the right place, right? I'm taking the world over the world this way. How are you taking over the world? Let's do it together, right? And it was this area, and there were not even big things. That was the part that was most shocking. There were things like, I've always wanted to write a novel, or I've always wanted to, travel to this place. I wanted to climb Kilimanjaro. I wanted to, like, they were not things that were out of, like, ridiculous, you know what I mean? So then we began this little group, that began to form, that it was like, okay, you know what, we're going to take our bucket list and make it a to-do list. You want to write a novel? Done. We'll find a publisher for you. We'll connect you. We're all intelligent women. Make it happen, right? And so it began just as a little, get together in my home, and then it grew, and then one day we said, we need to have a conference. And without having any experience, which goes to show you, right, because women feel the need to be like super ready to do things, right, and action is everything. So in January, about 6 years ago, we decided, you know what, we're going to have a conference about emotional and financial independence of women, because women are so worried about what people think about you, and that holds you back, right? And like, take a risk, like take a calculated risk, right? What's the worst thing that can happen? You have a podcast and nobody shows up. Oh, well, are you going to die because of it? No. And so you tweak it a little bit and do better marketing, and it's like just forward and forward and forward. And anyway, so we had that idea to have a conference. It was January, and we wanted to have it in March, because that's the International Women's Day, right, like 90 days into the future. And I remember friends, that they mean, and this is what happens to women, friends that mean that are trying to protect you, right? And I remember this friend that is like a media person saying to me, sweetie, it takes like years to plan a conference. It takes like a year, right? And I said, it's not that. I've attended a zillion conferences. It's not, how hard can it be, right? And I remember him saying, like, just invite all, because we started selling tickets. We didn't know what we were doing. We just figured we'll go to a hotel that runs everything for you. And that same friend kept saying, sweetie, you may want to invite all your friends and family, so the people that bought tickets don't feel, that they bought, a trip to nowhere. And I'm like, I'm not worried about it. So we started in January, kind of like promoting, and it's Powerful Women Today, and like, come talk about, emotional independence, financial independence. So we booked a room that held 25 people. I figured, you know what, if we can have a group of 25, we'll get it out of our system, right? 100 women showed up. And it was like, okay, more chairs, more chairs. And we're having this event, and we're just living it all out, right? And like saying, this is what's wrong with women. And it's not we are unhappy. Women, the 45 to 55, 60 are the most unhappy. And this is statistics. This is not me speaking, right? Because they broker a bad deal, right? They took over all of the, housework. They took over all of the raising of the kids. They just took on, right? And now they're unhappy, they're bitter, they're tired, they left their dreams behind. But the part that women, in my opinion, often don't do enough is take responsibility for it, right? Like, you're the one that kept saying yes. You're the one that didn't say, okay, you cook dinner Tuesdays, Wednesdays, I do Thursday, Friday. Like, nobody put a gun to our head, not in North America. We did this to ourselves, right? Let's undo it. And so we're going on and on and on, living our heart out. And at the end of the conference, I said, and next year, we're going to discuss financial independence. And this woman gets up from the audience and says, and I will sponsor you every step of the way. And yeah, and I'm like, okay, I don't know who that lady is, but somebody grab her business card, right? She ended up being one of the senior VPs at one of the banks here in Canada, because you never know. And this is why I say the power of passion, right? Because all you need is one listener. All you need is one person that believes in what you're doing and goes, I'll go with you, right? So then they began, because we were not for profit, right? I was, like I said, I was working. And we began this movement, and it's been close to 8 years now. We've done close to 1 million social media imprints. We've held conferences. We are now a publishing press. We're a coach accrediting academy. We have our magazine. We have our podcasting. Women are prepared to take responsibility. They just don't want to do it alone.
Carolina, tell our listeners, because they won't be able to see what we super on the video, how they can get in touch with you and learn more about this organization.
Certainly. Our organization is called powerfulwomentoday.com. So that is one way to find us. And another one is through social media. We're very active on LinkedIn. You can look me up, Carolina Billings. And we do have a presence on Facebook, although that's not as active. We're more of a LinkedIn shop. And we are, of course, on YouTube. And that's how you find us.
Where do you hope to see this in another 8 years?
Oh, great question. You know what? I don't like to see too far into the future, because when you plan into the future, you're only using the knowledge you have. So you kind of don't know what you don't know, right? So I don't want to say, oh, we're going to be in 25 countries, where it could be so much more bigger than that, right? So I don't want to limit it. But what I would love to see is more and more and more women taking control, taking responsibility of their lives. And that doesn't mean they need to be single. Because I tell you, an independent woman, emotionally and financially, can be the best partner, right? Just like you're hoping for a man or a woman or whomever you choose to partner with, you're hoping that they're emotionally and financially independent. So you become what you wish to be in the world, right? That's what I would like to see in 8 years.
Carolina, you have certainly a fascinating background and what all that you have achieved.
Thank
What
you.
would you like to tell our listeners and viewers that we have not had a chance to talk about? And it could be anything.
What I find with women, and there's also with men, like, this is really not a women only experience. It just happens that is the demographic we work with. But people underestimate their genius, and there's such a global audience waiting for a sign of hope, waiting for a solution. Like if you check on YouTube, there'll be like a 5-minute video on how to get your floors shiny, and it has like 20 million views, right? So there's things we take for granted, but the world is hungry for solutions and for acceptance. So seeing themselves, seeing their challenges that someone else is articulating, how they, what they also experience. So we work a lot with women to work on their visibility, impact, and legacy. And don't be afraid. The world is wide open now, right? So share your knowledge, your love, your hopes, your dreams, just like your audience with your podcast, right? They look to you for information and guidance and nurturing and friendship. It's the same for people all over the world, especially those voices in skin colors and hairstyles that we are not used to seeing represented. It's our time.
You've been watching the Biz News Podcast. We welcome your input. Send your email to editor@biznews.com. Thanks for watching.